Happy June. Hi, I'm Cece. I'm the registered dietitian with Kanema Fitness. This month we're going to discuss the relationship between nutrition and cardiovascular disease while we make a delicious chimichurri shrimp dish. The nutrients that we want to keep in mind in terms of nutrition and our heart health are going to be sodium, saturated fat, and fiber. Both sodium and saturated fat are nutrients that we want to try to limit in our diet, while fiber is something we want to slowly start to increase our intake of. Sodium can contribute to our body retaining a little bit more fluid on us. And so when that happens, it puts more pressure on our heart. So our heart rate is going to start to increase a little bit. So when that happens, we want to make sure that we're paying attention to the foods that contain sodium. There's some foods that we know are going to have a good amount of sodium in them, like frozen foods. We know canned foods sometimes are going to be high in sodium, as well as, maybe something like potato chips that we know have salt on them. But a lot of times our diet is naturally just going to be higher in sodium because it's in so many other foods. So looking at the nutrition facts label is always a good idea. With that, saturated fat is also added into a lot of certain foods as well. So foods like fattier meats are going to be high in saturated fat, as well as desserts, pastries, and sometimes certain packaged foods. So when we look at a nutrition facts label, we want to pay attention to the percent daily value. That's going to be the easiest way to target whether something is high or low in saturated fat or sodium. If it's 5% or below, that means it's relatively low in that food. If it's 20% or above, we know it's high in either saturated fat or sodium. And that in between range is going to be up for your discretion to determine whether or not that is high or low for you that day based off of everything else that you've been consuming. Our body still needs a good amount of sodium, about 1,500 to 2,000 milligrams, depending on each individual person's need. But our intake usually exceeds that 2,300 milligram threshold. To put it into perspective, about 1 teaspoon, yes, teaspoon, not tablespoon, of table salt is a little bit over 2,300 milligrams of sodium. So a little bit of salt goes a long way. So sometimes, cooking with salt, although necessary for certain food processes, there are certain dishes that can be made without sodium and without salt while still without compromising the flavor. So that's why today's dish is going to be a nice spicy chimichurri flavorful dish made without salt, so that you can see that, even without the added salt in your meal, you still get to enjoy all the flavors. Whenever we're trying to reduce sodium in our intake, I like to think about what else you can add, what herbs, what spices to contribute to a great flavor profile without feeling like you're missing out on the taste because you're taking out the salt. The last piece of nutrition information in terms of cardiovascular health is fiber. So saturated fat is going to be the nutrient that contributes to higher levels of cholesterol, while fiber, and a decent amount of intake of fiber, can actually help lessen our cholesterol levels. So if we're focusing on reducing the amount of saturated fat we're taking in while increasing our fiber intake, so incorporating more fruits and vegetables as well as whole grains into our diet, then we are on our way to having improved cardiovascular health. Again, everything in terms of nutrition and disease states is very individualized and based on your specific lab values and your medical history. So if you ever have any further questions, especially for you as an individual, feel free to reach out to me or any other registered dietitian to help provide you with accurate information. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with our chimichurri. So we are going to actually make the sauce in a blender. You are welcome to chop up all of the ingredients if you enjoy that process, but I'm in a little bit of a time crunch and I don't want to spend a whole day and a half, chopping everything up. So we're going to just put it in a blender to make our chimichurri. So I'm going to start with some garlic. So I just have a clove of garlic. I just need to peel it and then I'll add it to the blender. So we're going to start with a clove of garlic, and then I'm going to add some parsley. So again, you can chop up the parsley. I think I'm going to chop it up just a little bit smaller, and then add it into the blender. Okay. I'm going to make a generous amount of the sauce, so I'm adding about a cup of parsley. It smells so good. Okay. From there, I'm going to add about 1 to 2 teaspoons of red wine vinegar, a little bit of red pepper flakes. The red pepper flakes can be up to your taste preference. If you want it a little bit more spicy or with a little bit more of a kick, then you can add a little bit more. If you don't want any at all, you're welcome to do that. I'm adding some oregano. I did buy fresh oregano and then it just did not look good when I went to chop it up. So we're just gonna go with dried oregano, still have a good amount of flavor. So either will work. I added about 2 teaspoons. I'm going to go ahead and cut a lemon in half and add some lemon juice. So right here we have all of our mixings for the chimichurri sauce. Okay. So we're adding 1 lemon, or the juice of 1 lemon. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut up 1 lime, and we'll add the juice of 1 lime. From there, I'm going to add in some olive oil and then start the blending process. And I know I want more than 1 lemon and 1 lime equivalent of juice. So I'm going to start with this, and then based off of how it looks with blending, I'm going to add the remaining juice. Sometimes when you blend food, sometimes you need to add a little bit more liquid after the blending process. Okay. Okay. So with that, I'm going to add a little bit of olive oil, about 1 tablespoon. I'm going to add a 2nd tablespoon. Okay. And then I'm going to blend it and see how it looks. I just blended the chimichurri sauce and it actually seems to be a good consistency, so I'm not going to add any more juice to it. I'm going to pour it into this little canister. Some of it will fit into this, if you could kind of see the consistency as I pour it in. I'm going to save this half of it for our shrimp. And with that, we're going to get started with the shrimp. So I'm just going to add some shrimp to a pan on the stove and just saute it. First, I'm going to pat the shrimp dry. I got frozen shrimp, so I'm just going to pat it dry and then put a little bit of oil on the pan and then cook it until it's all set. And then before I take it off the pan, I'm just going to add, or I'm going to take it off the pan and then add this amount of the chimichurri sauce while it's still warm, so that the flavor really soaks into the shrimp. With that, I'm also going to make some cilantro lime rice for my side, and then we're going to make some veggies as well. Okay, so I've started with the cooking process for the shrimp. So I'm gonna prep all my vegetables. I'm gonna start with the zucchini. So I'm just gonna cut it up, cut the ends off, and then I'm gonna cut it into small little strips. Eventually with the zucchini, I'm going to just put it on a pan and just let it cook that way. So I have strips about like this big. And I'm just gonna finish chopping up this whole zucchini. Now that my zucchini is all chopped up, I'm gonna go ahead and cut my asparagus. So I'm gonna cut them in, I think, thirds for today because of the length of these. You know, really up to your preference if you wanna keep it whole, if you wanna cut it in half or in thirds, but I think based off of the size of these, I'm gonna cut it into thirds. I chose the zucchini because I think it'll absorb the sauce really well and it'll pair well with the whole dish. The asparagus is a great choice, especially in the summer. It's a nice addition. It's fun to roast as well. And then I'm also adding a bell pepper just for a little bit more variety too. You know, the vegetables are going to contribute to our fiber source. We're getting carbohydrates from our rice and lean protein from our shrimp. You know, when we add in more variety of our protein choices, it helps not only with our micronutrient consumption, but it does allow for reduction in saturated fat intake, especially if you're adding in lean protein sources throughout the day or throughout the week. So, you know, adding in some seafood about once to twice a week, if you're able to, if that's aligned with your diet, can always be helpful. And bonus points if it's going to be a fatty seafood, such as salmon, which provides some omega-3 fatty acids for us. So, like I said, today we're adding in the shrimp. Although it doesn't have omega-3 fatty acids, it is a lean protein source, so it helps reduce the consumption of saturated fat throughout the week. So we're going to continue on with this cooking process, and I'll come back when we have more steps done. Okay, so my shrimp just finished cooking, so now I added it to a bowl, and I'm going to add my chimichurri sauce to this bowl now that the shrimp are warm and cooked through, and then just mix it all together to allow the flavor to absorb. I'm just going to let this sit out while I cook all the vegetables so it has some time to marinate. Look how good that looks. So I finished with all the vegetables and I cooked my rice. Like I said, I made some cilantro lime rice. So I added it to my plate, added my zucchini, roasted bell pepper and asparagus as well. I just cooked it all on the pan on the stove. Sometimes I like to roast these vegetables as well. So that's another option. And that becomes a little bit easier actually because it can be roasting while you're prepping everything else. So that is up to you what you want to continue with when you make this recipe. So I'm just going to add the rice or add the shrimp. I'm going to actually add it on top of the rice. Then I'll get some of the sauce in here too. Oh, there we go. And then last thing to add is I'm just going to add a little bit of the chimichurri sauce to my vegetables. You can add this to a plate, a bowl, whatever seems right for you, but here we go.